We gotta love this story of the Father's mercy, the prodigal son, but there's much more to it. I wish I had enough time to go through everything here, but with last week's homily, I talked about the reasonableness of our faith and the reasonableness. We have reason to believe in all of that, and some people can twist that to mean like, okay, passions are evil. You know, because I talked about the intellect, how we got to form our intellect. And sometimes our passions go in different directions. And in this story, actually here in the gospel, there's a balance between, there's two different stories of the two different sons who the passions went in different directions. And the reasonableness of God's mercy and His love and His compassion. And it's really an awesome story that does that. So first you got this first son, the younger son. And he takes everything. He's kind of selfish. I want this. He's thinking about what he wants, right? And this world kind of goes in that direction too. So the world kind of like, I want what I want, and I want it now, right? Some songs kind of say that, don't they? Yeah, I want it, and I want it now. And when we look at those kinds of things, it actually brings about a suffering. Now, it wasn't until later that this son realized that after a famine broke out, that squandering all these things wasn't exactly the wisest thing to do. That probably wasn't God's plan, right? But he saw what he saw, and that's all he could see at the time. Because of ignorance, the intellect was not really well formed, and that allowed the passions to go off in one direction. And so he thinks he sees what is good. I want what I want. I see these good things and I want them. And the passions take over, and he has regrets with them. And so that's really important, a lesson for us to learn that, you know, if all we do is follow our passions, we will have regrets and we will be enslaved. Now that doesn't mean like if we want ice cream and we go out and have ice cream, that's an evil. No, that's not what I'm saying. It's when we have a habit. If we have a habit of just doing what we want, and this is what the world teaches. I mean, this is obviously what the world teaches. Do what you want, let your passions run, be obedient to your passions in a strict sense. You will be enslaved if that's a habit that you formed. And the classic story I give is actually my uncle. My uncle, he actually had a very bad drinking problem, and I find it really it exemplifies this thing. Unfortunately, he got his legs amputated. He was basically drinking, and he was living in the trailer home, and he ran out of LP gas, and he froze his legs, and so he had to get his legs amputated. But that wasn't enough for him to learn. And I remember when we were kids, we would go to the bar, and you know, the bar would specially open up for him at 9 o'clock in the morning. And he would go and he'd bring us kids, and he'd put the quarters on the countertop so we could play pool and Space Invaders and Galaxy and all that, Galactica or whatever. And but the bar would have 5 shots lined up on the bar with a beer. And he would come to the bar, and as soon as we'd go off and play the video games and play pool and stuff like that, he would just start to bawl uncontrollably and just cry and cry and cry for 2 hours straight, saying, I'm nothing but a alcoholic and there's nothing I can do about it. And he would just cry because he couldn't control his passions. He had to have that drink. He hated it, but that's all he knew. And he was enslaved to alcohol. And that's what happens to us when we let our passions take over and rule us. His free will was mitigated. His free will was mitigated, and it was taken away from him. and he suffered from it. And in a similar way, if we let our passions run amok, it will enslave us. It could be in anything. It could be an addiction. It could be something we're obsessed about. But following our passions in a strict sense, in that way. Again, just because you want to go and get ice cream one day doesn't mean, you're enslaved. That's not what I'm saying. But when we have a pattern and a habit of it, it does a lot of damage to us and to ourselves. And so we don't rejoice when people have become enslaved to those kinds of things. Rather, what you want to do is you want to lift them up and encourage them to overcome those tendencies. Now, the other way is, on this other son, is kind of a different flip. You got the one son who's totally kind of letting it all loose and coming out of the closet and all these things, let it all hang out, let it all go out there. You got this other son now who's obedient, but in a strict sense of obedience. And because he has this strict sense of obedience, you see the complaint he's got. Now, there's a logic. There's a logic to this complaint he's got to the father. It's like, wait a minute, this son of yours, he swallowed up everything. I was obedient to you. But the one thing that both sons totally miss, they totally miss this point. The father. Okay, the first son's like, I don't want to do all this stuff. I want to go out and do whatever I want. That's my freedom, right? And then the other one is like, I have to be obedient to the father. But when this first son comes back, the son who is repentant says, I just want to be treated as a servant. It's like, that's all I want. I just want to be treated as a servant. And even when he repents, he still gets it wrong. The father would have nothing of it. He does not want to treat his son as a mere subject, something to be domineering over. And this second son is kind of the same way. Look, I've been obedient to you. Well, the father isn't looking for obedience in the strict sense of servitude. He wants a son. He wants a son to love. And so he is quick to have mercy on him. He wants, see, the passions of Christ. When we look at the passion of Christ, that called him forth to give his very self for us. And how many times do we forget how much the Father loves us? What does he have to do to prove it? What does God have to do? You look at what he did. Think about it. Now, this is an amazing thing. I think about this at the Stations of the Cross on Fridays. After Jesus is condemned to death, he is scourged at the pillar. Humanity scourges him at the pillar. Humanity crowns him with thorns and mocks him. After humanity does all that to him, Jesus chooses to pick up the cross and be active in our salvation. Look, Jesus didn't take a little wand like a little fairy and say, bing, you're forgiven, bing, you're forgiving, bing, fairy, spread the fairy dust all over the place and we're all forgiven. No, he wants to be active in our lives. He wants to be active. He is determined to do something about our salvation, to let us know that he truly loves us. He is determined to share that love. It was a physical manifestation of God's love. What more could he do to prove his love for us? And that he is there, and that he is there guiding us and protecting us. We don't have to allow those fears to control us anymore. We can be free because Jesus has died and he rose from the dead. That's the logic of the passions of Jesus Christ and of God. And that's what he wants for us. He wants us to be truly free in the heart as true sons and daughters. We are born from Isaac, the freeborn son, not Ishmael, the slave-born son. Do we really live that out? Do we really believe that? And then on that, when we live this life here on earth, because we get so caught up into the things of this world, we start lashing out at others. This is like, okay, what Jesus here is giving this family argument, which is so typical of society today. The passions are just flying everywhere, and everybody's just assuming that the other person is doing evil because they are evil, they wanted to do evil to us. Like Thomas Aquinas taught that when people do something, even when there's an evil result of it, they didn't necessarily intend the evil. Most people don't have evil in their hearts. There are exceptions to that. But most people don't have evil in their heart. They don't intend evil for us. They see a good what they think is good, right? And so sometimes we end up judging other people, and particularly our own families, thinking that they intended evil. No. And that's why we got to guard our passions and make sure they're in line with truth and what is good and what is holy. Right? And so we got to guard them. How do we guard some of these things? Pay attention to our thoughts. Why do our passions run wild? Because our intellect has been wounded from the sin of Adam and Eve. We don't understand everything, and that weakens our intellect. And so then we justify ourselves. We make the wrong decisions. We become weak, and our will is mitigated. And so when we look at those things, now, what we want to do is we don't want to deny or squash our passions when they get in the wrong direction. That is actually the worst thing you can do. Like if you've got passions that are just popping up and you don't know how to control it, first of all, form the intellect. Realize that that person may not be willing than evil. Even if they've done evil, they may not have understood it as being evil. Most of the saints say, assume the best of the person. Assume that they have the best in mind for you, or for whatever the situation is that they see. And that's church teaching, right? But don't stuff it down. Stuffing down the emotions can be it's the worst thing. It's kind of like, I'll give the example of, if this podium here is my emotion, it just seems to be making me run amok. And if I put my weight behind it and I'm pushing with all my might with this against this amble, or against what I think is evil, if you push those passions so hard, a lot of times what can happen, this is the trick of the devil, what happens if all of a sudden the pressure of this amble is gone? What's going to happen? I'm going to go flying. That's what typically happens with us. And then those emotions consume us. So if I'm trying to get on my passions to try to stuff them down, right? A lot of times we think that we have to stuff down the passions or hide it from God. I got to stuff it down. I got to control this. No, you're not by yourself. God is with you. That's why you got to root it up and bring it up to Jesus and say, Jesus, I give this to you. I cannot control this. You need to take this from me because I can't. When that happens, now you're bringing it before Jesus, who is the Almighty One, and He can dispel it. He takes it out, right? So that's what's in it. So if you stuff on and you're kind of like a whack-a-mole trying to jump on top of it and stuff like that, it'll consume you. But if you raise it up to Jesus and expose it to Jesus, that's when it doesn't have that rule and that oppression to it. Realize also some spirits are going to be there if they know your weakness and your passions. They're going to be there, right? So when you raise it up to Jesus, He dispels those demons. He dispels those things, and then you can have peace and joy. You ever notice when you hold on to things, holding on to things causes suffering. It causes suffering. When you want what you want, I give the example of a kid in a store, and you're doing your pre-Christmas shopping, and these kids are going around, they're looking at all the toys that they want, and then they get upset because they don't get the toy that they want. And they're throwing and they're screaming and they're suffering because they don't get what they want right now. And they're suffering because of it. And they're making everybody else suffer because of it. When we hold on, in the same way, when we hold on to our own will, it causes us suffering. Right? It causes us our own suffering. We do it to ourselves. Another example of that, when it happened to me, is I used to be a gearhead, kind of still am. I like cars a lot. I grew up with this 1960 Chevy Impala that I had rebuilt. And it took me about 4 or 5 years to rebuild this car. And I had finally gotten it painted. I was like 20 years old. I had finally got it painted. And about a month after I painted it, I hadn't gotten all the trim back on. It went up in flames and burnt. I was driving to my mom's house. It backfired through the carburetor, and everything caught on fire underneath it. I had to walk out of the car and just look at it burn. And I'm like, what are you going to do? Can't control it. Can't change it. Got to accept it. God's will be done. And when I was able to do that, I had peace. Yeah, I put one summer, I made $3,000 working construction. I put all that money into the car, and it was gone. Poofty. Really poofty in fire. But letting go of our own will, letting go of our own passions brings us joy, and that's what really brings us peace, really, in our hearts. And that's what we got to look at. And that's where the first son, when he first went out, he didn't let go of it. He came to his senses and came back. The father had to convince the second son to let go of it and to come back. Because ironically, the son that actually was obedient was outside the father's house. He was obedient to the father, but he found himself outside the father's house because he refused to come in. He refused the mercy of the other son at that time. We think of it as accepting God's mercy, that he did come in eventually. And hopefully that's what we want for ourselves and what we want for others. We have family fighting at the family level, but even sometimes at a parish level. We wonder, why is this person doing this? Why is this person doing that? Don't worry about it. God is the judge. We wonder why the pews are empty. Why are they empty? Well, they're empty. We're all sinners, but we want to invite sinners back. And if a sinner doesn't have a chance to repent, there is no hope. With this first son, why is he coming back? What inspires him to come back? It's because he has hope that at least the father will take him as a servant, that his father will actually treat him better. That's why he comes back. And so when we got a lot of Catholics out there that have gone, they've left the faith. Maybe they're squandering all those graces. But to invite them back, to give them a reason to have hope, that they can come back, they will be embraced, that people can change. That is possible. And so that's what we do as a community and as a church, to welcome all sinners, because quite frankly, we're all sinners. I don't deserve God's mercy. I have no claim on Christ. Being a child of God was pure grace for me. I don't deserve it. I never have deserved it. But by the grace of God go I. And so we call people back to church. We call people back to experience the love of the Heavenly Father. And that's something we hope for, so that we can see them too and rejoice in heaven. Rejoice in heaven, because this is what an image of the Father in heaven is. That we can all rejoice in the Father's house. Rejoice in the mercy and the love of God that we have all received when it comes time to see them in heaven as well.